Please, do me a favor. Close your eyes for just a moment. Try to remember the exact smell of the pavement right after a sudden heavy summer rain in Athens or Thessaloniki. Or perhaps recall the sharp, sweet scent of jasmine hanging over a brick wall, mixed with the distant sound of a radio playing a familiar Lyko song. Welcome back to the 1980s in Greece. It was a time when our world felt smaller, warmer, and deeply connected. Today, we are going to walk together down memory lane and revisit 20 forgotten everyday rituals from our Greek childhoods. These are the small, seemingly insignificant habits that we have quietly lost over the decades, yet we secretly ache for them. And please stay with me until the very end, because the final ritual we will talk about is a deeply emotional journey that every single one of us took every August, a memory that still brings tears of pure joy to my eyes. Before we begin our journey, let us take a moment to understand the beautiful rhythm of that era. In the 1970s and 1980s, time in Greece simply moved differently. It flowed slower, like honey from a spoon. We did not have smartphones in our pockets, nor did we have instant messaging or infinite entertainment at our fingertips. But we were never truly bored, and we certainly were not emotionally poor. In fact, it was the exact opposite. Because we had to wait for things, we valued them immensely. We waited in line to make a phone call, we waited for a whole week to watch our favorite television show, and we waited for the mail carrier to bring a letter from a loved one. This waiting created a profound sense of anticipation and living in the present moment. Human connection was not a digital concept, it was a physical reality. You had to look people in the eyes, knock on their doors, and share your time with them. The lack of modern technology forced us out of our homes and into the neighborhoods, creating a vibrant, tightly knit community where everyone knew your name, your family, and your story. We lived a life rich in genuine sincerity. Let us begin with the sacred, untouchable ritual of the afternoon siesta, known to us as the Mesimeriani Isichia. Try to remember the heavy, uncompromising heat of a July afternoon in 1980. The wooden shutters of every house were pulled tightly closed to keep out the blazing sun, plunging the living rooms into a cool, striped twilight. From 3 to 5 o'clock in the afternoon, the entire country simply stopped breathing. The streets were completely empty, devoid of cars and voices. The only sound echoing in the neighborhood was the relentless, hypnotic buzzing of the cicadas in the pine trees. As children, we were strictly forced to lie in bed, whispering to our siblings, absolutely terrified to make a noise that might wake our exhausted, hard-working parents. We would stare at the dust motes dancing in the thin slivers of sunlight. It felt like time was completely suspended, frozen in the amber heat of the day. But when we finally woke up, the sun was lower, the air was sweeter, and the neighborhood began to slowly come alive again. It was a beautiful, collective pause that gave us the energy for the long summer night. And what beautifully long nights they were, often spent at the neighborhood open-air cinema, the beloved Theranos cinema. This was not just about watching a movie, it was a deeply sensory, communal gathering. Remember the sound of the white gravel crunching softly under your sandals as you walked in to find a canvas director's chair. The air was always thick with a magical perfume. The intoxicating smell of climbing jasmine, intertwined with the faint blue smoke of cigarettes from the adults sitting in the back rows. Before the lights went down, you would run to the small wooden canteen to buy a paper cone filled with roasted pumpkin seeds, the famous passatempos, or perhaps an ice-cold glass bottle of sour cherry juice. Then, the projector would start with a mechanical clicking sound, throwing a beam of light through the dark sky, sometimes catching a moth fluttering by. When the reel had to be changed, the word intermission would flash on the screen, and the whole audience would erupt into loud chatter, discussing the plot under the stars. It was pure, unadulterated neighborhood magic. Now, let us move to Saturday mornings and the rhythmic, soapy ritual of washing the marble balconies and sidewalks. In those days, a clean balcony was a matter of intense family pride, and every Greek mother or grandmother took this duty very seriously. You could hear it starting early in the morning, the harsh scraping sound of the hard-bristled broom against the wet marble. Women would attach long green rubber hoses to the kitchen or bathroom taps and drag them outside. They would scrub the white marble until it gleamed, using plenty of strong-smelling detergent. The soapy grey water would cascade down the drain pipes or directly onto the street below, creating small, rushing rivers along the curbs. The whole street smelled of fresh soap, mixed with the dusty scent of the city. While they scrubbed and rinsed, neighbours would shout out morning greetings to each other across the balconies, exchanging the latest local gossip over the sound of splashing water. It was a weekly cleansing ritual that washed away the dirt of the week and brought the neighbourhood women together. Another cornerstone of our daily life was the neighbourhood kiosk, the legendary Periptero. This tiny, glowing yellow box on the corner of the sidewalk was the beating heart of the community. It was open late into the night, acting as a beacon of light in the dark streets. Think about the heavy, solid feel of those large drachma coins in your small hands as you approach the small window. The kiosk was a treasure trove, decorated with hundreds of hanging magazines, newspapers pinned with wooden clothespins, and colourful plastic toys wrapped in cheap cellophane. For a few coins, you could buy a single piece of pink chewing gum, a beloved Mickey Mouse comic book, or an Ion milk chocolate bar with the iconic almond branch on the wrapper. But the Periptero was more than a shop. The owner, sitting inside on a high stool, surrounded by a mountain of goods, knew absolutely everything about everyone. They knew whose son was away in the army, who was getting married, and who was secretly buying cigarettes. They were the unofficial mayors of our street corners. Let us gather around the table and remember the magnificent Sunday family lunch, centered around a huge pot of coccinisto. Sundays were not meant for individual plans or quick meals in front of a screen. Sunday meant the entire extended family cramming into a dining room that was slightly too small for all of us. You would wake up to the incredibly rich, deep smell of garlic, onions, and fresh tomato sauce simmering slowly on the stove for hours, usually braising large pieces of beef or rooster. The table was covered with a pristine white lace tablecloth, reserved only for this day. The centerpiece was always a mountain of thick, long macaroni covered in that rich red sauce, buried under a blizzard of grated salty cheese. We would slice thick pieces of crusty village bread, diving in to mop up the savoury oil and tomato juices left on our plates. The room was incredibly loud, filled with roaring laughter, passionate political arguments, and the clinking of small glass tumblers filled with harsh homemade wine. It was a chaotic, loud, and deeply loving celebration of family survival and unity. During the week, feeding that family meant visiting the local grocery store, the bacalico, and relying on a vital instrument of trust, the tefteri. Long before credit cards or digital banking existed, our parents bought their daily provisions on credit, using a simple, worn-out little notebook kept by the grocer. You would walk into the dark, cool store, which always smelled powerfully of sharp feta cheese, sitting in large wooden barrels, briny Kalamata olives, and dusty sacks of dried lentils. The grocer, wearing a long grey apron, would wrap your cheese in thick white paper, hand you a loaf of bread, and then reach for his pencil. He would lick the tip of the pencil and carefully write down the amount owed under your family's name in his notebook. At the end of the month, when the salary was paid, fathers would go in and clear the debt. This entire system was built on profound, unspoken honour. The grocer trusted you, and you supported his livelihood. You were not just a customer in a barcode database, you were a recognised, respected member of a living community. For us children, the true joy began in the late afternoon, when we engaged in the most freeing ritual of all, playing outside in the neighbourhood streets until the streetlights came on. Back then, there were very few parked cars choking the narrow roads. The asphalt and the dirt patches were our grand arenas. We would gather with kids from all the surrounding apartment buildings, our knees perpetually scraped and painted with red iodine. We played endless, exhausting games of hide-and-seek, tag, and dodgeball. We used chalk to draw hopscotch squares on the uneven pavements. We negotiated rules, settled our own childish disputes, and learned how to interact with the world without adult supervision. The magic only ended when the sky turned a deep, bruised purple, and the orange street lamps flickered to life. Suddenly, a symphony of mothers' voices would echo from the high balconies, shouting our names into the twilight, commanding us to come upstairs for dinner and a bath. We always begged for just 5 more minutes, reluctant to let the freedom of the street slip away. While we played outside, our mothers and grandmothers partook in their own vital daily ceremony, the preparation and sharing of traditional Greek coffee, the kafedaki. This was never a rushed affair or a drink taken in a paper cup on the go. It was a slow, deliberate art. You remember the small brass pot, the bricky, placed over a tiny blue gas flame, the intense concentration required to watch the dark liquid, waiting for the exact moment the thick, creamy foam, the kaimaki, rose to the top without boiling over. The coffee was poured carefully into tiny, delicate porcelain cups, accompanied by a tall glass of perfectly cold water. The women would sit at the kitchen table, taking tiny, loud sips, discussing their burdens, their husbands, and their dreams. And when the coffee was finished, the cup was turned upside down onto the saucer. After a few minutes, they would lift the cup and study the dark, muddy patterns left by the coffee grounds, playfully predicting the future, reading letters, roads, and upcoming fortunes. It was cheap therapy and profound sisterhood poured into a tiny cup. If you stayed quietly in the house during those mornings, you would inevitably hear the melodic, echoing calls of the passing street vendors. Long before giant supermarkets delivered everything to our doors, the market came directly to our streets, announcing its arrival with loud, theatrical voices. You would hear the greengrocer slowly driving his three-wheeled truck, shouting through a crackling, distorted megaphone about his fresh watermelons or his sweet Corinthian tomatoes. Sometimes it was the sharp, metallic grinding sound of the knife sharpener sitting on his bicycle contraption, sending sparks flying onto the pavement as he sharpened the neighborhood's kitchen knives. And if you go back slightly further, you might remember the Iceman carrying massive, freezing blocks of ice on his shoulder with metal tongs, delivering them to households that still used iceboxes instead of electric refrigerators. These men were the familiar soundtrack of our mornings, providing a musical rhythm to the daily chores of the city. As the blazing summer slowly turned toward autumn, households engaged in a wonderfully sweet ritual, the making of the traditional spoon sweets, known as gliko tukutaliu. When the seasonal fruits were at their absolute ripest and most abundant, nothing was ever thrown away. Grandmothers would sit for hours, carefully washing and pitting sour cherries, slicing thick green figs, or peeling tiny bitter oranges. Then came the boiling. The huge pots bubbled on the stove, cooking the fruit in heavy, rich sugar syrup. For days, the entire house, and even the staircase of the apartment building, smelled overwhelmingly sticky, sweet, and comforting. The finished preserves were carefully transferred into beautiful glass jars and stored in the cupboards. This was not just for the family to eat casually, it was the ultimate gesture of Greek hospitality. Whenever a guest arrived, even unexpectedly, they were served a tiny, sparkling glass plate holding a single spoonful of this glowing, sweet fruit, presented on a silver tray alongside a glass of ice-cold water. Let us pause and remember the heavy, frustrating, yet profoundly important ritual of using the public telephone booth or visiting the local telecommunications office. Before every home had a reliable landline, and decades before mobile phones, connecting with someone far away was a physical mission. You would stand in line outside the grey metal phone booths, gripping a handful of heavy 10-drachma coins, shifting your weight as the person inside yelled into the receiver. The booth smelled of warm metal, stale tobacco, and old paper directories. When it was your turn, you pushed the heavy coins into the slot, hearing them clunk down into the machine. Dialing the rotary wheel took patience. Because the lines were often terrible, especially when calling the remote villages, you had to speak incredibly loudly, practically shouting your love and news across the mountains. When the coin dropped and your time was running out, a frantic panic set in to say goodbye before the lines suddenly went dead. Every minute of conversation cost precious money, so every single word truly mattered. Another sound that completely defined our era was the crackling broadcast of Sunday soccer matches played through small, portable transistor radios. Every Sunday afternoon, regardless of where you were, the air vibrated with the intense, rapid-fire voice of the sports announcers. Fathers and grandfathers carried these little rectangular radios pressed tightly against their ears or laid them on the tables of the cafenio, pulling out the long metal antennas to catch the signal. You would hear this same broadcast echoing down the street, passing from balcony to balcony, or even along the crowded beaches during the summer. Suddenly, a collective, roaring cheer would roll through the entire neighborhood when a goal was scored, followed instantly by loud groans of despair from the opposing fans. Men would debate the referee's decisions fiercely over their coffee. That little plastic radio connected thousands of people simultaneously, creating an invisible stadium that stretched across the entire country. On quieter weekday mornings, you could witness the deeply communal chore of stringing green beans on the front stoop. In an era without air conditioning, doing kitchen prep inside the hothouse was unbearable. So, mothers and grandmothers would take a large metal bowl filled with fresh green beans, pull up a low wooden stool, and sit right on the sidewalk or in the shared courtyard of the building. Their hands moved with incredible mechanical speed, snapping the ends of the beans and pulling the tough string down the side. But the real magic was the conversation. Neighbors across the street would bring out their own bowls of peas or potatoes, and a loud, continuous dialogue would bounce back and forth across the asphalt. They talked about the rising prices, shared recipes, complained about their ailments, and offered unsolicited advice on raising children. It was a beautiful, functional way of turning a tedious domestic chore into a deeply connecting social event. Now let us talk about the ultimate expression of our open-door culture, the celebration of the name day, the famous Jyoti. Back then, birthdays were barely celebrated, but your name day was a monumental event. If your name was Yanis, Maria, Georgios, or Kostas, your house on that specific day transformed into a bustling public square. The most incredible part was that there were absolutely no formal invitations. The front door of the apartment was quite literally left unlocked or propped open. From early afternoon until late at night, neighbors, distant relatives and colleagues would constantly drop by just to wish you many years of life. The good crystal glasses were carefully taken out of the display cabinet. The hostess would run around with a silver tray, offering everyone homemade cherry liqueur in tiny glasses and luxurious chocolates wrapped in shiny, colourful foil. The house was packed with people standing shoulder to shoulder, filled with loud wishes, laughter, and a sense of belonging that we rarely experience today. If you close your eyes again, you can probably hear the rhythmic, hypnotic clicking sound of the komboloi, the Greek worry beads. This was not merely a tourist souvenir back then, it was an extension of a man's hand. In every traditional kafenio, through a thick cloud of cigarette smoke, you would see older men sitting on wooden chairs with woven straw seats, deep in thought or intense political debate. In their hands, strings of heavy amber, glass, or plastic beads flipped constantly. Click, clack, over the fingers, around the palm, and back again. It was a mesmerizing, masculine ritual. The komboloi was used to measure time, to ease the stress of hard labor, to help quit smoking, or simply to give restless hands something to do while the mind wandered. That clicking sound was the steady heartbeat of the Greek coffee house, a sound of slow contemplation in a world that had not yet learned how to rush. For the younger generation, a memory that instantly transports us back is the feeling and smell of the blue school uniform, the beloved podia. Before the strict uniform laws were completely abolished in 1982, every single student wore them. Boys wore blue shirts and trousers, but the girls wore those iconic, stiff blue smocks with crisp, bright white collars. Try to remember the smell of the freshly ironed, slightly synthetic fabric on a crisp Monday morning. Mothers would carefully tie white ribbons in their daughters' hair to complete the look. While kids back then complained about how ugly and restrictive the uniform was, looking back, we realize it held a profound social power. When we stood in line in the schoolyard for the morning prayer, you could not tell who was rich and who was poor. The blue cloth erased the harsh lines of social class. We were all completely equal, just children standing together, sharing the exact same experience. Perhaps the most universally loved childhood ritual was the simple act of buying fresh bread in the morning and eating the crust on the way home. Mothers would hand us a few coins and send us to the local bakery, the Fornos, just a few blocks away. The smell of baking yeast hitting the street was absolutely intoxicating. The baker would hand you a large, warm loaf of village bread, casually wrapped in a small square of thin paper that only covered the middle, leaving the ends exposed. As you walked back home, the heat of the bread warming your hands, the temptation was entirely impossible to resist. You would secretly pinch off the crunchy golden end of the loaf, the prized gonia, and pop it into your mouth. The contrast of the hard, flour-dusted crust and the soft, steaming center was heavenly. By the time you reached your kitchen, the loaf was always missing its ends, a silent crime that every mother knew about but gently ignored. As teenagers in the 80s, our most intense emotional labor was put into the creation of the perfect mixtape on a cassette recorder. Music was not something you could just stream infinitely. You had to work for it. You would sit in your bedroom on a Saturday afternoon, hovering over the stereo with a blank cassette loaded inside. You listened to the radio for hours, waiting patiently for the DJ to finally play your favorite rock or pop song. The moment you heard the opening notes, your fingers would violently smash the record and play buttons at the exact same time. The absolute fury when the radio host spoke over the guitar solo was unmatched. We carefully hand-wrote the track lists on the tiny cardboard inserts, using our best handwriting. Giving one of these mixtapes to a friend or a crush was a massive declaration of affection, containing hours of dedicated effort, tangled magnetic tape, and our most secret, unspoken feelings. There was also a profound lesson in value taught through the simple ritual of returning empty glass bottles to the store. Everything we drank, from the sharp, sparkling lemonade to the local beer, came in heavy, thick glass bottles. When the drink was finished, you never threw the bottle in the trash. That glass had actual worth. We would carefully gather the empty, sticky bottles, put them into a sturdy canvas bag, and carry them back to the grocery store or the kiosk. The shopkeeper would count them out, the glass clinking loudly on the counter, and hand you back a few drachmas as a deposit, or let you trade them for a new bottle of soda. It was an early, natural form of recycling, but more importantly, it taught us as children that things had a cycle, that materials were precious, and that taking care of our waste could yield a small, sweet reward. And finally, we arrive at the most anticipated, chaotic, and deeply emotional ritual of our entire childhood, the August journey back to the village, the epic road trip to the Horeo. When August arrived, the cities completely emptied out. Families would pack their small, non-air-conditioned cars, like the old Datsuns or Zastavas, filled to the absolute brim with suitcases, gifts, and food. We kids were squeezed into the back seat, sticking our bare legs to the hot vinyl. The journey was long and exhausting, winding through dangerous, unpaved mountain roads. The car smelled intensely of exhaust fumes, hot dust, and the incredibly sharp scent of wild pine trees rushing by through the open windows. But then, as the sun began to set, you would finally see the first houses of the village. The car would pull into the dusty square, and before the engine even turned off, you were out the door, running as fast as you could into the wide, tearful, open arms of your waiting grandparents. It was the purest feeling of coming home. As we look back at these 20 memories, it becomes beautifully clear that we are not really mourning the loss of the old objects. We do not actually miss the heavy coins, the slow telephones, or the static on the radio. What we truly, deeply miss is the way those things made us feel. We miss the enforced patience that made the rewards so much sweeter. We miss the absolute necessity of knocking on a neighbour's door just to talk. Most of all, we miss our youth, our parents who were still young and strong, and a time when our society felt like one giant, chaotic, but loving family. We miss a time when a simple piece of warm bread or a glass of cold water with a sweet cherry was enough to make us profoundly happy. Thank you for walking down this nostalgic Greek road with me today. If this video brought a warm smile to your face, please gently press the like button and subscribe to our channel so we can continue to share these beautiful joys. Now, I turn to you, my friend. Which of these 20 rituals brought tears to your eyes? And what deeply personal memory from your own childhood in Greece would you add to this list? Please, write your stories in the comments below. I am waiting to read every single one of them.